have seen so far the use behind elasticity. We have also seen how to calculate a simple example of elasticity, price elasticity of demand. And now we want to try to figure out what it actually means to obtain a price elasticity of demand equal to 2, equal to 3, equal to 0.5, equal to 0, equal to 100. So we're going to go through some of the extreme scenarios and then discuss which category a certain product may fit in. So the 5 different cases that we're going to be going through are highlighted here. And to note is that we always will deal with a positive elasticity because we're taking the absolute value. Okay. So just recall, how do we calculate elasticity? Well, the price elasticity demand is the percentage change. So this little triangle is for change of quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. Okay, so what would happen if this were equal to 0? What would this represent if this was equal to 0? Well, you have to think about what's going on here in this equation for this to be equal to 0. For some of you, math is probably far, but if you have a denominator which is equal to 0, it can't really be calculated, it's undefined, or if it's something very close to 0, it's actually going to push this total value close to infinity. So the only way that I could have a value of price elasticity demand equal to 0 is if we have a situation where the percentage change in quantity demanded is equal to 0. So regardless of the price that has changed, my quantity demanded is not changing. Okay, so how would this look like graphically? Well, as usual, I have my price, my quantity, and I have a situation where the price can change, but the quantity demanded will not change. So I will have a demand curve that looks as such. And this demand curve here will be one of our first examples that we will be looking at, and is a demand curve that we refer to as perfectly inelastic. Okay. And when I think about elasticity and I refer to all these characters here, I try to think about different products that could have different elasticities. So you think of an elastic band, you think of a rope, you think of a piece of steel, you think about just anything. Well, everything has a certain level of elasticity. So even though you just have a rock climbing rope or something, well, that rock climbing rope has a certain stretch possible to it. If you pull it strong enough, it's going to pull back at you. So that has a certain level of elasticity, which is clearly not as much as an elastic band. Here we have a product that has no elasticity. So I'm changing the price, so I'm kind of pulling on this band, and nothing happens. No response at all to a percentage change in quantity demanded. So this is a good that will not see its demand change for a certain change in price. Examples we could give here are very extreme. It doesn't really happen in practice, but it's very important to understand that if it's equal to 0, it's perfectly inelastic, so that we'll be able to compare an elasticity of maybe 0.05 versus an elasticity of 0.95. They might be in the same category, but it's a big difference. One is getting much closer to 0. It's getting much closer to this extreme case. In this extreme case, the examples I could think of is air consumption and different things like that. If we were to start paying for consuming air for breathing, well, regardless of what the price is, you're going to pay for it or you're going to die. So this is an extreme scenario, and this would be one of the closest ones available. Or water. Water was completely controlled. Okay. Afterwards, we could think, well, let's look at the other extreme. What happens if this n value here is equal to infinity? Well, the only way that this eta could be equal to infinity, this price elasticity of demand, in this case here, would be if percentage change in price is equal to 0. Okay. So then this means that the quantity demanded can change greatly. It would change like to a very, very high level for a very, very small change in price. So if you have a very small change in price, you can go from here, I consume, and above here, above this price here, oops, sorry, this here is my demand curve. So what would this look like graphically? Well, we have a situation here, as usual, that I have my price and my quantity. But now I have to have a situation that if I change the price by a very small percentage, it's going to change my quantity demanded completely. So at this price here, this is my demand. If you were to increase the price just a little bit, there would be no more demand. Okay, again, this is an extreme scenario. It's just going to be used as a benchmark, but once again, we could see that the closer this price elasticity demand gets to infinity, the flatter it will be, and the closer it is to 0, the steeper it will be. Okay, so here we have the other extreme case, which is perfectly elastic demand. Okay. So in this situation here, different cases that you could think of, I could think of essentially as if you could buy a certain product with these from a certain seller, and then you could buy it from another person a little bit cheaper. Well, probably the first person's sell will probably be nil. So I think of if I'm a big stockbroker and I could buy from two different salesmen a certain level of stock or gold or something else at a certain rate from someone, and someone else tries to charge me an extra $1 for the same service offered, for the same everything, it's the exact same product, and I'm transacting with the large values, this will probably not happen, so I will just not buy from this more expensive person and buy everything from the other one. Okay, of course, prices may adjust, but just in this very simple example, this would be the situation. Okay. Our third kind of extreme, more rare scenario would actually be when this price elasticity demand is equal to 1. In this case here, I have to have a situation where the numerator, which is my percentage change in quantity demanded, has to be equal to my denominator. So I don't care if it's a change in 10% for a change in 10%, 5%, 5%. The percentage change has to be identical in both cases. This way, if this is equal to this, well, 1 over the other will mean a price elasticity demand equal to 1. Okay. In this case here, actually, some people think it's just going to be a straight downward sloping curve, but it's actually going to have a small bow to it. Come back to the details later of why it has a small bow. But it's going to have this kind of situation here. This will be referred to as my unitary elastic demand. Okay. So these are my 3 extreme cases. Naturally, we're not going to those extremes. We're going to be discussing 2 main categories. So what are my 2 main categories? Well, I'll either have a good that is inelastic or a good that is elastic. So a good that has very low response to a change in price versus a good that has a very high response to a change in price. So here, price can change drastically, going from this amount here to practically double the price, but I've noticed that my change in quantity is very small. Whereas over here, my demand curve It could be really flat. So here you change this price and you don't even double it, you just increase it by a small amount. And all of a sudden you could see a big drop in quantity demanded. Okay, so here very low response to a change in price, here very high response to a change in price. And as I mentioned, with the extreme scenarios, if I obtain elasticity that is closer to infinity, it's going to be flatter. If it's something that's smaller and smaller and smaller in number, it's going to become steeper and steeper and steeper. So here, just to highlight what is elastic, well, it's going to be something that has a price elasticity demand that is greater than 1, and here inelastic smaller than 1. Okay. If I want to exclude the extremes, it has to be greater than 0 or else it becomes perfectly inelastic. And here it has to be greater than 1, but it has to be smaller than infinity. Okay. So these are the classes it could go. So 0, 0 to 1, 1, 1 to infinity, and infinity. Those are all the groups that I could be dealing with. This will become important if you're a business about to market your product for the first time or looking at the possibility of changing the prices of a certain good. Well, in those situations, you want to understand how people really react. If people are more the type of being very elastic with your product and you were to decide to increase your prices by 20%, you might quickly realize that you're losing a lot of your customers. So essentially, the type of graph that you're looking at, the curve that you're looking at, depends on the elasticity. One last little thing here that we could do is if you had two elasticities compared, you want to be able to say which one represents a higher elasticity value and which one has a lower one. So between D1 and D2, which one is more elastic or has a higher elasticity factor, has a higher price elasticity demand that gets closer towards infinity, and which one has a lower one? Well, if you guess that D1 being flatter has a higher elasticity, you are right. D2 being steeper has a lower elasticity factor, therefore it is closer to 0. So in this situation here, I could be looking at the same product. They're both currently selling at this price here, and I'm looking at what happens if I increase my prices. Well, I could see that product D2 will see a small drop in quantity demanded, where product 1 will see a larger drop in quantity demanded. Okay.